Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 8 of the Inside Events podcast by SwapCard. My guest today to chat news is familiar with SwapCard. He is a general manager at SwapCard, Matthew Donegan-Ryan. Hello, how are you today?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm great. Thanks for asking me to join today.
Absolutely. So this is super meta for me because I'm recording a podcast at an event that's a podcasters conference. So
well, I hope you've been picking up some new skills while you're down there.
Oh, of course. Everything's percolating. I keep getting ideas for things to do to make changes on both my podcasts, and I even have a new podcast idea. So yeah, so I've created more work for myself since I've been here. It's all good.
Looking forward to subscribing to the next one too.
Well, it's gonna be a sports podcast, so a deviation from business.
Yeah. About what's the topic? What sports in particular?
So I'm kicking around calling it my take this week, and so it'll be basically about anything, whether we're talking about the baseball scandal, whether we're talking about my football team losing the big game a couple weeks ago, or tennis. I'm just a huge sports nut. So
fantastic.
Yeah. So, and we are recording this on Valentine's Day too. So happy Valentine's Day.
Same to you.
All right. So I'm going to read your bio. So he is, as I said, general manager at SwapCard, which is empowering face-to-face meetings at events through artificial intelligence powered apps. Matthew Donegan-Ryan has been a pioneering entrepreneur in the event industry since 2005. He has a history of creating and growing innovative event technology businesses and spurring widespread adoption by meeting professionals. Matthew has helped lead 2 previous companies to successful acquisitions, CrowdCompass by Cvent and Thriva by Active Network, which was then also later acquired by Vista. So we know that the acquisition story, we've talked about that before on this show. In terms of news, the like Pac-Man thing that's happening. I guess that'll work.
Gobbling up all the innovative startups. Yeah.
The video, people who watch the video will get that. The audio that doesn't using your hands play well on an audio podcast. So my apologies that I was making the Pac-Man move with my hand. All right, so we're going to talk news. The elephant in the room is coronavirus, and really it's just dominating the news for our industry right now, and it's super important to talk about, I think. And one article that stood out to me, which I don't totally agree with everything they say, so this will be an interesting conversation. In PC Magazine, the name of the article is "Fear Kills a Great Trade Show: The Death of Mobile World Congress 2020." So it was just, they canceled it on the 12th, so like 12 days before.
Yeah.
Which is huge. And of course, I think he's in media and he's upset. He thinks this, and it's true. It is going to cause a ripple, not just like for us in events, which that's a thing too, and we could talk about that. But for that industry, because that's a very much a mobile phones, like people want to touch them. Like very few mobile phones just get ordered online because people want to see it.
It's a very tactile experience, especially if you're switching from Samsung or Apple to one of the smaller players. You're not going to do it unless you can actually see and feel the phone, or at least read a publication of a journalist that has given you their opinion on it.
Right, no question. Yeah, and so the company that I'm going to read the quote from the company that plans the event, which
GSMA.
Yeah. With due regard to the safe and healthy environment in Barcelona and the host country today, the GMSA has canceled MWC Barcelona 2020 because the global concern regarding the coronavirus outbreak, travel concern, and other circumstances make it impossible for the GSMA to hold the event. Now, when I was first seeing all this news, it was before I had seen the announcement that it got canceled. but I kept seeing that companies kept dropping off. I mean, huge, like 40 different companies had canceled on them. And so it's one of those things where like I get being upset that it's canceled, but when Amazon, Cisco, Ericsson, Facebook, Intel, Nokia, LG, you know, when all these companies aren't, Sony aren't going to be there, it's like, well, then who are you having it for?
Yeah, well, it's like the decision was made for them. It's not it's not like they had the choice of hosting it or not. If your key exhibitors aren't there, the people the journalists want to see and the attendees want to see, and the smaller suppliers want to partner with, if they're not there, you know, you don't have a show.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I was sad, but I don't know. So, but anyway, so here's a quote from the author is Sasha Segan. This cancellation is a huge loss. It's a huge loss for the industry, for innovation, and for 5G. And it isn't going to save any lives. The hysteria over the new COVID virus outside China appears to be the Shark Week of epidemiology, playing up a low-risk threat into screaming terror because it has a scary face. In this case, the face of China, a newly terrifying enemy of all things Western. Now that's like so loaded. I mean, he says a lot in those two sentences, but and I hear what he's saying, and I agree that really it's more about fear. I mean, and the thing is, like, only 2 people in Spain have been diagnosed with this
and they weren't even on mainland Spain. I believe they were Mallorca and the Canary Islands, I think.
Oh, okay, even more so. But it is, I think it's like, it's that all the people coming in from everywhere and potentially bringing it with them kind of a scenario too, which is part of the fear.
Yeah, and I think, you know, being that a lot of the attendees are Asian and from China, there's potentially a bit of racism there as well. You know, it's like if you go to the airport in any major city or get on the subway, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different people who have traveled around the world. And, you know, with the big companies, somebody like Amazon not wanting to risk any of their employees getting sick, it just forces the hand of the organizers. But, you know, the organizers, they waited until, you know, 11, 12 days before the event to cancel it. It's not like they had more information at that point of time than they did a week before that or 2 weeks before that. The only thing that
they did have more information. They had information on companies not showing up.
That's what I'm saying. But there wasn't more information about a cure for the disease or spread within Europe. So it's all down to the exhibitors canceling.
Right. No doubt. I do feel really bad for Barcelona though, because that's like that millions of dollars. Because, you know, we talk about the trickle down effect, right? Like from the housekeeper to the taxi driver to all those food servers, all those people. The city's going to miss out on, you know, millions of dollars in revenue.
Yeah, the estimate I saw was 500 million, which I definitely believe, you know, 100 plus thousand people coming into town for, you know, 4 or 5 days.
Right.
All that spending adds up. And also, if you think about potential waste, you know, I'm sure a lot of food and other supplies were shipped in for the event, and what's gonna, you know, can those be used? Will they expire? You know, hopefully it doesn't generate, you know, obviously when you have a trade show, there's waste generated, but we don't want additional waste that doesn't have utility occurring as well.
Right, that's a good point, actually, and a great segue into our next article. Well done. So our guest on the show today is Tahira Endean, and she had an article published by MPI last week, 9 tips, or sorry, that's the next. We have a distribution challenge and we can fix it. And that idea of all these things that of food that gets wasted and, you know, like you just said, like, I wonder what they're going to do with all that food, potentially. Hopefully they read Tahira's article and they're going to donate it.
You should forward it to them.
So basically, she goes through all the different elements of an event that kind of, like contribute to waste a bit. But she's, she's got solutions. So she talks about rethinking waste, not just minimizing it, but like, can you actually use the whole product? So when you talk about veggies and stuff, like, do you really, you can use the whole veggie, and, kind of getting creative, right? Rethinking how much we actually need. Can you like cut out a meal and then actually make that a CSR thing, and then donate that money maybe to a local food bank, or whatnot. And I want to ask her about site selection, because I think that that's important. But do you remember, I remember the days of when before the law, because there's a law in place now that you can, if it hasn't been served already, you can donate it.
Yeah.
But I remember that being an issue before that law got put, like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, we have to throw it away.
Yeah, the restaurants and the hotels didn't want to take on that liability.
Right.
And I know I'm in Seattle, and here in Seattle, there were some organizations that would go and collect the food, and then they would take on the liability. So the restaurants and venues had no problem giving them the food. But now, a lot of areas of the world, you're either it's legal to give away the food, and you're waived of any responsibility. And in some places, it's even a crime to throw away food.
Oh, that flips that on its head, right?
Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, which all comes back to thinking about planning better, and how much do we actually need, and really doing a good job of knowing what our attendees want, and kind of working that into and I think if you make it, like I said, a corporate social responsibility, a CSR thing too, then that also is good. I think it spreads goodwill, and it sparks a little, like, I think it'll give a little dopamine hit, right, for the attendees, like that, oh, we're doing something for the community, or whatever, without having to actually do anything, just by not eating a meal.
Yeah, they skipped out. And one thing that's tough for planners is, you go to a different venue every year for your conference, and often you don't have that, the food and beverage data from one venue. When you leave, you get a bill, and you get the total amount of each type of meal that you paid for, but not necessarily what was consumed. So when you go to the different hotel, you don't really have any numbers knowing, okay, well, the vegetarian was more popular than we thought. Let's order more vegetarian and maybe cut down on red meat. So if you can actually get that data from your F&B manager, you can help make better decisions at future events as well.
That's such a good point. Yeah, for sure. That is really interesting. For sure, that should be part of the logistics, part of the process for post-show, for planners to get from their venues.
Yeah, because if you look at, I've worked a good bit in music festivals, and at music festivals, you're selling your food, so it's tracked exactly.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to know, if I'm serving a light beer and a couple craft beers and an alcoholic spritzer, exactly how many of each type of drink was sold, and then you can adjust your numbers for next year. But when you're not selling the food, you're just placing it out there. You don't know what was wasted and what was consumed often.
Right. Unless you make that part of the plan, like your recycling, just like you're composting, a lot of these convention centers, I know, like San Francisco, San Diego, they've made that a huge part of what they're doing. So I love that. Interesting. All right. Well, today we're talking about intentional event design with the incomparable Tahira Endean. So I'm sure she'll have some insight for us with regard to both of these topics. And so let's cut to our second half with our guest. Okay. Hey, so I'm really excited to introduce our guest for this show, Tahira Endean. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
I love this woman. She is one of the smartest people I know, and I've had her on my other podcast. Actually, I've had her on 2 other podcasts before, and now that it's exclusively, this is an exclusively events podcast, it makes perfect sense to have Tahira on to talk about intentional event design. I'm going to read her bio. She has all the letters after her name. She's all the things: CMP, DES, CED, VIP. All right. Tahira Endean, writer, speaker, connector, collaborator. Tahira is designing people-centric, purpose-driven events and living in Vancouver, British Columbia. She is head of events at Site Global, the Society for Incentive Travel Excellence, if you don't know. The more complicated the event seems, the more useful she will be to you. Developing events for our industry peers allows her to bring creative energy to events and use the combination of ubiquitous technology, love that, and human nature to create relevance for our participants. Tahira's book, Intentional Event Design, Our Professional Opportunity, was written from 2 decades of experience producing events, designing environments where trust is nurtured, driving growth for participants and organizations. And I'll just give it now, the intentionaleventdesign.ca is her website. So you can go and grab that off the interwebs. And I highly recommend it. I just taught a class on using events to build your digital brand. And I had a whole slide dedicated to tips from intentional event design. And the talk was around, well, many things. I had to, for hundreds of people with varying backgrounds, right? So you never know like kind of where people are, but I felt like it was important to at least touch on those things that you know, bulleted at some point in the book as most important. But okay, so I want to start out, like, it might sound obvious, but can you tell our listeners what is intentional event design?
Well, for me, it's about actually thinking about what the purpose is when we're doing events. I mean, it's really not more complicated than that. So when I wrote it, it's a couple of years now, but it was really about the things that we should be doing that there wasn't really anything being written about. So there's, you know, blog posts and things around, but really just looking at how do we use space thoughtfully, how do we design for our stakeholders from the very beginning. It is about how do we integrate technology in a way that still keeps things really human, and how do we keep people feeling well and healthy through our events, and how do we do it sustainably. We have this one planet that we're going to live on, so we need to figure out how to do that better. So really just looking at holistically creating events where people are energized throughout. You know, I have to tell you, it's fun. We just did our Site Global conference in Vancouver, and, you know, it was fantastic. I smiled for 3 days, but what I really smiled about was that from the opening session on Saturday afternoon to the closing session on Monday afternoon, we still retained more than 90% of our audience.
Wow.
So really a testament to people wanting to still be part of the dialogue, which was so happy making.
Yes, for sure. Do you have any data on how that compares to previous years?
I think you can compare that to any conference you've ever been in your entire lifetime. I know that's really good.
I know it's really high, but I just like numbers nerd sometimes, or I like to.
Yes.
I don't like to make the numbers happen, but I like to know what they are.
Right?
And how they've changed.
Yeah, I think honestly, in 27 years of doing events across all sectors, that's really rare.
Right.
So it's good. I was really happy to see that they stayed because they wanted to still stay. You know, they were still, and we hadn't worn them out so much over the 2 days, even though, you know, we had breakfast meetings and evening events but we had really tried to create a balance and, you know, good food and rest and reflection times, and it worked. So
that is awesome. Fabulous. Matthew, you got a question for our guest?
Yeah. Tahira, I read your article in NPI recently, though we have a distribution challenge and we can fix it. This notion of getting to zero hunger, I think it's a fantastic idea. I was wondering, what tips do you have to planners when they're doing their site selection to help them meet this distribution challenge?
Well, I think it's a shared challenge. So I think, as planners, we can say we have 300 people coming, but what does that actually translate to in pounds of food? And what's the right food that we're serving? And so it's starting with working with the destination. Where can you go that actually has local seasonal food as part of their practices? And then the venues that you're choosing, how are they managing their food and their food waste, and minimizing waste to start with, redistributing food that has been prepared but never served, and actually looking at, and again back to Megan's data, what are people actually eating? So it's great to have quinoa salad, but if you make 8 vats of quinoa salad and regularly 2 get eaten, then do you need to adjust those quantities? Or the same with protein or whatever it might be. And I think that it is a global issue, and I think for us to say as event planners, how it really is one small step at a time. It's really looking at what are people eating, how much are we actually feeding them, and how often do they need to really eat? We really do.
Yeah.
Breakfast break, lunch break,
Yes.
reception,
It's like Pavlov's
dinner.
dog. Yeah, I eat more at conventions than I ever do, simply because it's there. So I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and you're
I don't
often
think I've ever had a lack of food at a conference.
no, and you have food that's left over, and food that just sort of it appears and then it disappears. And so it's about it's about a lot of things. It's about about guarantees, it's about selection. It's we have this whole new we had 600 people and 134 dietary allergies and preferences, and that's the norm. 20 to 30% is the norm. I was just at another event this week that had 40% vegetarians, except that there's some vegetarians who will eat vegetables and bacon, and some who are pescatarians, and some who will eat chicken. And
A vegetarian who will eat bacon?
yes.
Well, I can tell you, my wife is a vegetarian, and when she lived in the South, a lot of the vegetarian meals came with bacon, and she was not very happy with that.
No, because it doesn't make any sense. But you know
No.
what I mean? It's also, but then it's also where are those vegetables coming from? If we're having tomato salad, but all those tomatoes are coming to Canada from Mexico or from, I think for me, one of the big statistics was, we would, I think, all agree that one of the areas most affected by hunger is Africa as a continent. And I remember one of the big numbers from the Icelandic volcanoes. So we were stuck in Paris. Not really. It's like, I know 5 extra days in Paris. Whatever will I do while we're staying in our friend's apartment? So, but I remember one of the statistics being that there was, it meant that where we were, there was 100,000 pounds of fruit and vegetables that was not able to be flown in on a daily basis from Africa. So we have a continent of people who could use more food, and a country that is accepting 100,000 pounds of that food on a weekly basis. So that's a distribution challenge. So those are the kinds of things I think that we need to think about fundamentally.
Yeah, that's crazy stat like that. And I wouldn't think of Africa as exporting food like that, but and they, like us, are not exactly feeding their people maybe in the ways that they should. So yeah, we could do a whole show on that. But so my next question for you is now, and I'm going to ask you to not use your show that you just did as an example, since you already talked about it. But I wanted can you give us an example of the best inattentional event design being put into practice that you've experienced recently, other than your own?
Other than the one that we just did?
Yeah. I'm not going to let you be a homer.
No, it's all good. We go to so many things that feel kind of same. So I think, for me, one of the big things is when we start seating people, and there's this, we have this propensity that everything has to be a round of 8 or a round of 10. And they're completely useless for conversation in either case. You can't talk to any, you can talk to maybe 2 people away on a round of 8 or 10. You can't talk to the people across the table. So you miss a lot of conversations. So anywhere that I go where there's either places to flow through for conversation, or where there is a round of 5 or 6 as the standard, are the places that I'm finding that I'm enjoying the most, because you're getting the most out of them.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's funny. You just brought to mind a wedding, the head table at a wedding. I've always thought that was the craziest setup because I can only talk to the people who are right next to me. I can't even see the bride and groom. Like, it's so silly.
Yeah.
So I like that as a thing. And I talked about that, getting creative with seating is, I don't know, it sparks a little extra something too, I think, in our brains, right? To like, we learn differently, don't we? And it's sitting in different ways.
Of course. Yeah. Because your brain just wakes up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we're starting to see a lot more of, which is great. So there's a lot of, sort of traditional icebreakers, but I think sort of any kind of, I'm going to call it a non-traditional icebreaker, but just anything that gets you up and moving and talking to people in a different way is, even funny things like having people all stand up and, first you have to whisper hello. So you whisper it, and then you say hello, and then you have to say hello to someone beside you and make eye contact. And, then you have to say hello as if you were your favorite animal. So it's all that happens is people start laughing because it's so ridiculous. But what that laughter does is it actually opens up your mind to learning. It starts to get those brain chemicals going that allow us to be open to learning. So it might take a minute and cut into your speaker's time by 1 minute, but they're going to get a lot more out of the next 19 minutes, for example.
That's awesome. Yeah, I attended a session at IMEX we had a break in the middle. We did laugh yoga.
Yeah, like that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and Tahira, if we can just shift a little bit, I was going to ask you about the state of event tech and what's your opinion on where we are in terms of either innovation or lack of innovation.
So I went to Australia in December to speak about event technology, and as the day that I was finishing my presentation, a tweet came up from Julius. And we can all agree that, Julius and the Event Manager blog, really, they've spent a lot of time delving into event technology and research around it. And the tweet was basically like, there's nothing new. So, we're making small incremental iterations. And I was like, oh, thank God it's not just me. But it's true. And, so I think we're starting to see a lot of things that now, but so let's just use today's real life example of, when are cameras good or bad? Didn't we just have a baseball example this week of maybe, this thing that we have everywhere, cameras, is maybe not such a good thing because it can, we can use them for so many different good or not good purposes. I think that with technology in general, things like facial recognition can be great when it's done well, because it really can save a lot of time. And it can scare people because it feels like, oh my God, there's facial recognition. Now, the people who are scared by it are also often the same people who have global access, where you have retinal scans to get you through things, and who are happy when you want to tag your friends on Facebook or Instagram and the names come up automatically. That's just simple facial recognition. That's just the way the world is. So we should stop being scared of it and just make everything easier with technology. I think we're seeing a lot of good engagement with platforms. Can I say platform names?
Sure.
Platforms like Slido have just made it probably the easiest ever to, get a group in a room to easily engage and without a lot of barriers, and to ask really good real-time questions more simply than a lot of other platforms have done. And so we have the opportunity, I think, to take some of these incremental changes, and also that, we have that balance between convenience and accessibility versus security. So it's really, how do we balance those things so that people are comfortable? I know with Expo Logic, who's been doing facial recognition, the way that the faces are recognized essentially becomes a pixelated image that disappears into 400 million bytes on the back end, so that they're not actually storing your picture. they're storing a combination of pixels that look like your picture, if that makes any technical sense.
Yeah.
You know, but there's some things like that where there's, you know, these security parameters in place for that. And then I think, you know, what my favorite thing probably is Traffic Cam, which is an app you put on your phone. You can take pictures. You take pictures when you're in hotel rooms, but what that's doing is allowing a database to be collected that's helping stop human trafficking. Because now, if somebody sends up a picture and says, I'm being held in this room, there's now a data bank of places where people can, you know, so there's a data bank basically of hotel rooms around the world where people can be held. And they're not being held in, they're being held in places that are very standard places and big brands and all, you know, everyone has this issue. So the Traffic Cam allows faster data bank to be collected basically. So I think that's cool use of meeting and event people traveling around the world and using technology.
No doubt. Wow, that's really cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. It's an app.
Yeah, it's an app and it's called Traffic Cam, like TRAFIC Cam. I think. Yeah.
I mean, that's great. That I like the marketer in me goes to SEO right away too, right? Like well, people are going to find that even though they were maybe looking for something else, and then get exposed to that. That's interesting. Yeah, we could do a whole show on that issue, but we shall move on. So, all right. All things being equal, if a planner is experiencing resistance from their leadership on making changes, I know that never happens, on making changes towards being more intentional, like room design, for example, like we talked about. What's your advice for that planner that's coming up against that?
I think just don't try to do everything at once, you know. So as much as you might want to make 12 changes, make 2 changes and track it and see how it works. And watch what people's response is, ask about it in evaluations. And when you're testing something, take that leadership to show them what's working about it. You know, like here's this space that you were concerned about, what this space, you know, I'll give you an example of, you know, a few years ago, we did a session that was, and I just put one of the sessions into a hallway, basically, nothing fancy, but it was just, you know, a session that happened in a hallway. And it's in the Vancouver Convention Center, they have these tables, like essentially like a chair with a table on it, but there's 54 of them that you can roll them into any configuration. You know, so we put up a screen, had these chairs, and then standing room pedestal tables behind them. So sometimes there was 30 people sitting in those chairs, and sometimes there was 100 people standing at those sessions. And it worked for everything. You know, it was really good. I'll give you another example. I'm going to just go back to the one I just did. But
that's okay.
we did a session with the quiet headphones. So the night before, we had used them in a silent disco format. And it was fantastic because I wasn't sure it was going to work, honestly. They wanted to show it. I'm like, okay, let's, you know, I'm not sure that this group will do that, but, you know, we ended up in the, you know, the final half of the evening, the dance floor being packed with people doing silent disco. That wasn't the important part. The important part was at least 10 people came up to me the next day and said, thank God we were able to talk to each other last night, because we weren't trying to compete with the band or have a big DJ over the room. So the people who wanted the music and dancing could still do that. We used the same headphones, like a different format, like now the conference version of those headphones. The next day, we took our general sessions out of the ballroom and put our main sessions onto an industry stage, but in the foyer space. And we did that because it's January and you wanted some natural light, and I didn't want to just lock people in the ballroom the whole time. So we had one speaker who came up. So the first speaker was Dave Merrill, and he's just like, headphones, cool, I've never done this, like, let's try it. You know, and he does a session on design, which we see him around, and his sessions are always great. And he'd never done it before, and he just totally embraced it and was like, okay, this is cool. Like, that was really interesting, because here's the thing. People put on headphones, you're talking into their ears. You're right, you're in their head. They're not looking at their phones. They're not talking to each other. They're focused on the speaker. the next speaker who came up, and I won't mention who this is, but he was, first of all, he was a little bit rude to my very lovely program staff member, because he's like, I didn't know about this. I'm not doing it because my session is very interactive and it just won't work if people are on headphones. And at the time it was pretty quiet in the foyer. We're like, okay, you know what? Don't use the headphones. Like, you know, if I can't make you, I can't make you. We've got speakers, it's fine. Well, what happens is his session is the one that's right before lunch. So now what starts to happen is all the people start to edge in towards lunch. It starts to get very noisy. Nobody, you know, he's now yelling at his audience instead of, he doesn't have his audience interacting anyhow, you know, because, you know, when you have an interactive session like that, that's a 30-minute session, you might say a few sentences to each other, but it's not like a workshop session.
Right.
So, you know, so the whole thing just kind of fell apart on that speaker. And but it's kind of his own fault, because he had this opportunity to have a really focused audience. Because here's the thing. So if I have a really focused audience with the headphones on, and now I still want you to maybe interact, I can just say, hey, just move aside your headphone for a second, talk to the person beside you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, without it being too disruptive, actually. And that it could have been really effective. So it's just, you know, so we test these things.
Right.
And honestly, for every other speaker where people were wearing the headphones, it was awesome. And the other people in the room loved that they could walk past and see people engaged. And I can't tell you how many times now, because here's every hotel that went by said, oh my God, I now have another way to sell a breakout in my space. Right.
Right.
So just test things and see if they work.
Yeah.
So,
well, we had Brian Fanzo on episode 6. I'm with Adam Perry, and we talked about that and his as a keynote. And I mean, he does smaller stages too, but for him, it was, he's cool with it. He just wants to know, he wants to be prepared. So maybe
totally.
that was the thing probably with that speaker, like threw him off a little bit.
Yeah. But you know, you and I both speak all the time. Sometimes you just got to be like, okay,
roll with it. Yeah.
You know, the hardest one for me was when I went to present in Turkey and then realized, oh my God, I actually really need to slow down because they're translating everything into Turkish from this stage. So, which they hadn't mentioned ahead of time. So.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Tahira, I wanted to ask you about your role with Site Global. I love attending Sites events. It seems like every planner you meet there has the biggest budget per attendee that you'll find in our industry. I imagine you have some pretty unique challenges with your events there. I was wondering if you could share one or two of those with us.
Well, let's see. Planning events for planners with the biggest budgets in the universe. Yes, that could be. No, it's Do you know what I love about Site? And I started a year ago. And so the first event I went to was in Bangkok, and our global conference. And what I found actually was that people were just really nice. And I wasn't necessarily expecting them to be as nice as they are. I've been going to industry events for a long time. And it really is, it's an interesting community. It's, you know, it's the smallest association, but it really is one that has really built we're here for you sort of community. And it's really nice in that way. The challenges come from, how do we always create something that is going to show them something they haven't seen before in a destination that they've probably been to. So the events I'm responsible for are just our global portfolio, not our chapter portfolios. And so, you know, we'll be in Davos. Well, they've probably been to Davos, or at least Switzerland. So what can we show them that's new? And then really just, how do we stay ahead of the education curve so that we're, you know, they're going to go to a lot of things, particularly our buyers have the opportunity to go to many educational opportunities through the year. So how can we really be taking things that are going to combine a level of personal and professional knowledge that are going to leave them wanting to come back. So it's, but on the flip side of that, I also get a lot of trust put in me to be able to deliver. You know, it was a pretty rigorous hiring process. And so I get some latitude to test things and try things. That was part of the reason that I was hired, I think, was because they knew that I would probably push things a little bit.
That's awesome. Nice.
Yeah, I'm really lucky.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, well, I would trust you too. So I would. I mean, obviously, I already said you're one of the smartest people I know, so that's like a no-brainer. But okay, so before we let you go, I want to be conscious of your time. I just real quick wanted to ask, because in the news section, we talked about the coronavirus and very large-scale events getting canceled. And it's really having this ripple effect. And the biggest piece is fear. What did you come across at some cancellations, or what kind of, how did that play into your event last week?
No. So 3 weeks ago, no, it didn't. Last week,
Oh, sorry.
no, but I'm going to just say last week I was at another event where they had a number of their international delegations cancel because they weren't able to travel. This is going to have an effect for a long time. There's no way around it. It's I think as a association that focuses on travel, we have to show resilience and we have to show how it can be done. Had a really interesting conversation this morning with the CEO of In-House Physicians, and of course their work is providing doctors and medical care for large conferences, and they've been doing that for 30 years. And so a lot of their work comes in preparing people for medical, what shots do you need before you go to X country, those kinds of things. The simplest thing that we can do is to get people to understand that the most important things that we can probably do are wash our hands with soap and water for, sing happy birthday twice, and stop hugging all of our friends. Those are two really big things. The reality is that as much as it is, at what we would consider sort of epidemic proportions right now, it's not nearly as dangerous as just getting the regular flu.
Right, exactly.
So it really is about getting over that fear. That the challenge that we are really going to have is that in the meetings and event industry is that, as we saw with Mobile World Congress, the reason that they're canceling is because 40% of the companies have just put a ban on any non-essential travel, and a trade show is not considered essential travel. So that's going to have a ripple effect on our industry for a long time. We're going to run into a lot of, force majeure, cancellation insurance increases. All of those things are going to start to happen, and it's going to take a while to recover. And then there will be something else,
Right.
the Zika virus, the SARS, the
Right.
it's going to be there's always going to be something with travel. We went from travel shaming earlier in the year, which is unfortunate, but not deadly. So I think we have to really continue to think about sustainability, wellness, and the value in bringing people together face to face and proving that value.
No question. Well said. Well, that was I think that was a great way to end the show today. Thank you so much, Tahira, for being our guest today. And thank you, Matthew, for joining us from the team.
Nice to see you, Matthew. Nice to see you, Megan,
good
as
to
always.
see both of you.
Nice to see you both. It was really great having you on. And so this has been episode 8 of Inside Events by Swapcard, and we will catch you next time.